Hi, and welcome to the Thriving Farmer podcast, where we hope to inspire, educate, and celebrate sustainable farming and food production. This is your host, Michael. Today's guest is Dave Chapman of Longwind Farm. Now, Dave started Longwind Farm back in 1984 with a team of oxen, and after a couple of years, he switched to doing greenhouses, and now he's known in the New England area for producing almost year-round tomatoes grown in soil. You know, if you go into a Hannaford's or Whole Foods, most likely you will find Dave's tomatoes there. Dave is a founding member of the Vermont Organic Farmers and has been very active in the movement to keep the soil inorganic. Dave is proud to be a current member of the Policy Committee of the Organic Farmers Association and served on the USDA Hydroponic Task Force. So a lot of what we discussed in this episode is around Dave's involvement with the Real Organic Project and his fight to have the USDA recognize that soil-grown vegetables should be the only way organic produce should be grown and not grown hydroponically. So we discussed that. We discussed Dave's background with farming. We discussed a little bit about growing tomatoes in soil in northern Vermont in a highly automated greenhouse setup. And we discussed, some of the challenges with the whole sustainability aspect of what does true sustainability mean, especially for someone like him who is using a lot of inputs. So great conversation. I hope you have a listen, and always looking for feedback on what you think of the episodes. Today on the podcast, we have Dave Chapman of Longwind Farm. Welcome to the podcast, Dave.
Thank you, Michael.
So, Dave, why don't you tell us a little bit about your farm and kind of what got you into farming?
Okay. Our farm is called Longwind Farm. It's in Vermont. We are actually situated right on the banks of the Connecticut River. It's very beautiful. We're an unusual organic farm in that our cropping is greenhouse tomatoes, and it's entirely inside a greenhouse. I sort of started at the other end of the spectrum of agriculture. I started with a team of oxen a long time ago, growing vegetables on a little rented piece of land that was just about the same scale that we're at now, which is about 2.5 acres.
Much more intensive now.
We're more intensive for sure now. When we started, I had worked for Jake Guest for 1 year as half of his crew. It was the first year he was in business at Killdeer Farm, and I really appreciated the chance to learn so much from Jake. He had farmed for some time out in the boondocks, and he had moved kind of a little closer to town to be closer to his market. When I started on my own, Jake had tractors and all that, but I had a team of oxen that I had raised from calves and trained. I was a logger back before I was a farmer. Logging was unprofitable and dangerous, and I figured I would do something that was just unprofitable and dangerous. So I sold the oxen. Well, I farmed for 2 years with the oxen, and they would pull a plow, they harrowed, they spread manure. So that was my tractor work, but mostly it was an intensive market garden, and we grew vegetables and sold them at a farmer's market.
So now you've switched to the HighTech greenhouse. How did that transition happen? Was it over time or?
Yeah, very gradually. So after 2 years with the oxen, we bought a piece of land, this piece of land. And, we came and we still sold at the farmer's market. But after a few years, we bought an adjoining piece and we were able to have a roadside stand. And we sold the oxen, we got a little old John Deere, and then we got another tractor, and then we got another tractor, and then we got another tractor. Very typical evolution of farming skills and scale. We never were big scale. I think we got up to about 7 acres. We did a little bit of wholesale. We did farmers market still, and we had a roadside stand. As far as the greenhouses, that was an evolution. The very first year, we built 2 small 50-foot by 20-foot greenhouses out of 2x4s. Terrible design. Everything was wrong. By then, I had become pretty good friends with Elliot Coleman, and he lent me a wonderful book about organic greenhouse production from England. I remember making compost in one greenhouse I had built in the fall, and I made a compost pile in it over the winter to spread in the spring. And remember, it was really hot. And I kept calling Elliot and saying, Elliot, it's too hot, according to what Doug Blair said. And he said, well, add more carbon. So I kept adding more sawdust to it and kept getting hotter and hotter. And so when I finally spread it, of course, and planted a crop, they all turned yellow because all the nitrogen was locked up. We didn't know what we were doing. And that was fine. We had a lot of things that did work and a lot of things that didn't work. It was a business enterprise where we substituted a lot of hours of labor for a lot of expertise. I had a good friendship with Elliot, and I would go up to the mountain school where he was the farm manager, and we would talk for hours and do potting soil experiments, and he shared his awesome library with me. So I learned and I learned and I learned, and I'd already read a lot in my apprenticeship with Jake. Those early organic farmers were awfully literate. There was a lot of reading going on, and mostly they were first-generation farmers, the vegetable farmers in New England. So, we read Albert Howard, and we read Brady's Nature and Property of Soils, and we were just trying to figure out, how does this work? I actually grew up on a farm, a dairy farm, but I didn't know anything about growing vegetables. I knew how to drive a tractor, and I never imagined I would become a farmer. I couldn't wait to get off the farm and do something else. But when I came to Vermont, being an organic vegetable farmer looked pretty exciting. And it was exciting. I mean, it was just so much passion and idealism and community. There was something tribal going on. The early NOFA conferences were just wild parties and wild sharing opportunities for ideas and information. So, yeah, people like Elliot, but people like Stuart Hill were speaking, and Stuart was an amazing soil ecologist. He was a soil scientist from McGill, and he was one of the very first academics who crossed over to the dark side, to organic.
Yeah.
As Stuart has said, the only way he could do that was to be actually a better scientist than his peers, because otherwise they would have thrown him out of the house. But he published so much and he did such good work that they had to begrudgingly accept that he knew something. So, those first brave people who crossed over, it was a different world back then, and it was tremendously adversarial from the academic agricultural community towards organic. And USDA despised organic.
Yes.
Extension agents despised it. So there was a big us-them schism. That it's not that there isn't conflict now, but on the face of it, that schism is really changed, and you get these great academics like Dave Mortensen and John Spargo who are doing great work, and there's real interchange. I can remember I was the first organic farmer who became a board member of the Vermont Small Fruit and Vegetable Growers Association. Okay. And now, last I saw, the president was an organic grower. Half the members are organic growers and half aren't. And there's a real interchange there. Vermont's a very civilized place.
Yes, absolutely. I think each of us in our own right, in our own space, have a lot to teach the other person. And
absolutely.
So, there's good to see how they're doing things, how we're doing things, and there's a lot of sharing going on.
Yes.
So talk to us, your tomato farm. Talk to us about the season of your tomato farm, because you do longer term. So walk us through kind of like what that looks like on your farm.
Well, until pretty recently, basically we pull the crop in December and replant immediately. We would have the babies growing in another smaller greenhouse. And so we'd be empty for about a week to 10 days. Then we'd bring the tomatoes, the young babies in, and we would start to produce in early March and produce until December again. That was the season that we followed for many years. And just recently we're working with lights, artificial lights. So we still have natural light, but we're supplementing that with artificial light, and it makes it possible for us to harvest all winter. So we have one house that we pull out in July and replant so that we can keep our markets happy all winter.
Gotcha. Yeah. So let's talk about the sustainability side. A lot of people have a lot of different ideas of sustainability. What does sustainability on a farm mean to you?
Well, let me start by saying I don't think our farm is sustainable, but I don't think many things are.
Yes. Okay.
There's a book by Yvon Chouinard called The Responsible Company, and he said, well, I wanted to make it the sustainable company, but I don't think any companies are. Okay. So we're imagining a revolution and working towards real sustainability, but we're not there yet. Our farm certainly isn't there yet either. I think the thing that we should be talking about in greenhouse operations is energy and carbon footprint. And we've made a lot of progress there, but we have a long way to go. So interestingly, the path that we have taken is very technical, a lot of equipment, a lot of ways of using less energy to produce tomatoes out of season. We used to be a really mixed farm. We started with a couple little greenhouses, and now all of our production is in a glass greenhouse or 2 glass greenhouses. I kind of went that direction a long time ago when my kids, who are now like 28, when they were born. And I wanted to be a really involved parent, and I found that I just couldn't figure out how to do that and run the farm the way it was, because I worked all the time back then. I thought it was all the time. It's like a 70-hour week, and I loved the work. That wasn't a problem for me. But, when we first got our son, I wanted to also be involved as a parent, and I really failed on both levels. I felt like I wasn't spending the time I wanted to with my son, and the farm started to lose money.
Yeah.
And I asked other farmers, like, well, what do you do? And they said, I haven't slept with my wife and my kid for 2 years. I'm like, what? Like I was talking to guys and they said, my wife does. And I was like, well, wait a minute. What about all the gender equality that we were talking about and that I believed in, and they believed in too, but it wasn't what was happening. I'm not pointing a finger at anybody here. I'm just saying what I was looking for that would work for me and how I wanted to live my life. So we decided to simplify the farm dramatically, because before then we were just everything. We were every vegetable, every berry, every fruit that we could grow. We were a lot of bedding plants, perennials, field dug perennials, mums, all the herbs, anything we could think of. We were growing it that we thought we could grow, and we were selling it, and it was really fun and exciting. And we had this great community that was based on our stand. When we closed that, actually, people got really upset with us. And I understand it, because they're like, well, where are we going to get our food? There are other really great farmers around us, and they found their way to them. But I like to think that we were doing something special, and they thought that we were doing something special. But, we have to figure out on all these things that we do, how do we make it work emotionally, and how do we make it sustainable emotionally? How do we make it sustainable economically? Obviously, we're all in the same situation, and it's a difficult thing. We have chosen a tough economic arena to make a living in.
Yeah. You're right. There's not just one level of sustainability. There's a sustainability of your family, sustainability of the financials. And I think it really comes, as I have 2 young kids myself, it comes down to, I love spending time with them. They're not going to be small for that long. So making sure that you build a business that you can spend time with them is incredibly important, or you're going to live your life with a lot of regrets.
Yeah, I agree. And I would add, there's that beautiful book, Natural Capitalism, that was written by Paul Hawken and Amory and Hunter Lovins. It's the idea has become well known, but I think, other parts of sustainability besides, because of course, in the shallow capitalist model, sustainable means profitable and the bottom line. And natural capitalism is saying, well, that's got to be sustainable to the human resource and to the natural resource. And I agree with that. When I read that book, it was that book that when it came out, and I thought, they have a factor 10 challenge that they make, which is, can you take on the challenge of reducing your carbon footprint by 90% of whatever your business might be? And I thought, no, I don't think that would be possible for what I do. But I thought, just to think crazy, what if I did a factor 4 where I reduced it by 75%? And I thought that would be impossible, because greenhouse is energy intensive, and it's no worse than making ice cream or going to college, but it is energy intensive. So how do we make it better? Or is it just wrong? Is it just wrong to grow tomatoes in a greenhouse, for example? Is it wrong to make ice cream? Is it wrong to have cold beer? There's a lot of things. Is it wrong to fly someplace? And a lot of people are saying, yes, all those things are wrong. And I respect that. I respect the decision of somebody who says that. But my goal has been to kind of quote Amory Lovins, how do we figure out how to have hot showers and cold beer without destroying the planet? That's what we were trying to do. So we took on the Factor 4 challenge, and I really spent years on it trying to figure out how to reduce our energy by 75%. And we got about halfway there. and a lot of things. We put in more and better energy curtains and side energy curtains, and we put in air-to-air heat exchangers, so when we had to dehumidify, we weren't throwing away all the heat. And in the new greenhouse, we got insulated sidewalls. We tore down our poly houses. Mostly we have got a couple little ones we grow babies in, but we replaced them with glass, which amazingly, when I first got into it, I thought the glass greenhouse would use more energy but get higher yields. The opposite was true. It used less energy significantly, but it also got lower yields. So, that's an interesting conversation why that would be in both cases. We tried to make the best envelope of a building that we could. Well, we've gotten about as far as we can figure out how to get on the envelope. So now got a couple other things. One is to move our energy source to electricity as much as possible.
Okay.
Green Mountain Power, that we get our electricity from, claims that they're 90% green on their grid. Let's call it 60% renewable. And if you're using the energy at night, it's virtually 100% renewable. So when we look at something like lights, for example, and as strange as this sounds, the reason we actually got into lights wasn't for marketing. The reason we got into lights is because a Dutch friend of mine convinced me that it used less energy per pound of tomatoes produced. And
interesting.
Yeah, because you get an increase in yield by having light when the plants are suffering from no light. Without a doubt, the quality of the tomatoes goes up. Even in the fall, like November, we have no light here. And we still had tomatoes, but they weren't very good. Under lights, they're still very good. And I'm convinced that the medicine is better. But that was one, and we're working on a heat pump project, an air source heat pump project, instead of propane, which is this energy source we use now for making hot water. And I don't know. I'm hoping that by next year, at this point, we will have replaced, we'll be beyond factor 4. I hope so.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
So you've mentioned a couple different times different people you've learned from, mentors of yours. Tell us about one of the most influential lessons that you've learned, and kind of, how does it affect you and how is it helping your farm?
Certainly, the most influential mentor is Elliot, and I still talk to Elliot usually a couple times a week, and sometimes just to whine and complain, and sometimes we get onto some really interesting conversation. Elliot is always inspiring to me. He's a much better farmer than me, and also a much better organic farmer. There's a great book called Bad Feminist by Roxane Gay, and she writes it saying, I'm a feminist, but I'm a really bad feminist, but I'm doing my best here, and these are what I'm working with. And that's how I feel about me as an organic farmer. I'm a bad organic farmer, but I believe the quality of the food we grow is awesome.
Yes. Yeah. I've been there. You guys do it's an incredible operation.
Yeah, it's good medicine. And I feel like, talking about carbon footprint and all that, and you think about, well, if somebody's eating this food and they're not getting sick and they're not having to take incredibly expensive drugs, how does that work in the equation? And it's complicated. And I thought, well, is it crazy what we're doing? Does it make more sense to grow this someplace else and ship it in? It probably does from a carbon footprint, but the truth is nobody's doing it in Florida or Mexico. That's not what they're shipping in. They're shipping in, no offense, but they're shipping in crap. It's not the same thing. It's not apples and apples. It's a different thing. So it's a complex conversation, and, we're here talking. Michael, I know that you have a really sophisticated understanding, so I'm kind of, as a really top coach said to my son, you're a stud coach, so I'm going to tell you the truth. So,
well, I appreciate that. Yeah, because you're right. It's a very complicated situation, and it's something I think a lot of people look at from the outside and say, oh, he shouldn't be doing it that way. But you're the person who's been thinking about it for years, and you're like, well, does this make sense? How can we be better? And every person that does farming, and that's just what we tell people we work with, is on a slightly different path. And it's what works for them, and it's what works for their context.
And I respect the people very much who say that you shouldn't do it that way. I really do. It's not just happy talk. And if somebody chose not to buy our food because of the way we grow it, I really applaud that. I want to see more of that. I want to see people making informed, responsible choices about the agriculture that they want to support. I thought about, well, maybe I should just grow kale and spinach and, not use any energy, right? I mean, really, it was a serious consideration. And one of my close friends was a skillful farmer, he's moved out of farming, but he said, Dave, if you don't do this, who will? I mean, if you're not looking for an alternative path, because we know the alternative is Mexican hydroponic tomatoes, right?
Yeah.
Or people only eating winter squash and spuds for the winter. And that I respect that. I don't respect the Mexican hydroponic solution.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, so we can talk about that. But, I do think that we need to grow really good food and have a regional local food system. Having said that, there are a host of problems that we've got to address, and energy is an enormous one, but it's one. And I will say that there are people, I'm just saying all the things that people don't like me for, lots of people don't like me. That's fine. And also people who feel like, well, we don't rotate the crop. We don't. We grow tomatoes on tomatoes. And the reason that we can do that is because our soil is so alive. Mm-hmm. And we bring in a constant kind of stream of compost. We have so much life in the soil that we've never had something bad happen. We've never had a soil disease, which is considered a given if you're monocropping like that, not rotating. But we haven't. In the early days when we started this, we rotated the soil every year. We actually went and shoveled the soil right into a cart and rolled it out and brought fresh soil in. And I thought, well, we can do that. I can make that work. And there we've embraced the organic ideal of crop rotation. And I didn't think of this. This is something they used to do 150 years ago in the market gardens outside of Boston. There's a guy, Peter Henderson. Maybe it was outside of New York. Peter Henderson. He was one of those old writers whose books I got from Eliot. Yeah. And they grew in greenhouses, and they would grow lettuce. And they would just dig the soil out and bring in new soil. I thought, well, we can do that. So that was one way to address it. Then I just started experimenting with not changing the soil to see what happened. I didn't see a change in the plants or the yield or anything. And then I started experimenting with not tilling.
Okay. Yeah.
And it got better. It got better. I was like, oh, isn't that interesting? If I bring in compost and rototill it, then the quality of the first three clusters is lower. And if I don't till that soil, and at this point I hadn't heard of no-till, I knew about mycorrhizal fungi, but nobody was really talking about, if you till, I didn't hear that. Just the way I hadn't heard about global warming when we started Factor 4. It was just, let's use less energy.
Yeah.
Now we go, oh my God, we got to figure this out or we got to die. So exactly. It's become a big thing, but I'm so old that I've been doing this before we had some of the better understanding. Anyway, I didn't really understand why tillage was a negative, but I understood it was, and so we stopped tilling. Mm. So now we pull the crop and we dig a hole, we put the tomato in, and that's it. And we bring in compost and put it on top, and that's it. And now that I read all the wonderful stuff there is from all the great thinkers who are out talking about this, Chris Nichols and A.M. Bickley and David Montgomery, and you go, yeah, right, when you till, you're really setting back the mycorrhizal fungi, so of course things aren't going to work as well because you've kind of shot some of your nutritional foot.
Fascinating. So let's talk about beginning farmers, because I know you've been in this space a long time, and Vermont is a hotbed of beginning farmers. What are some of the mistakes you see them making as they first start out?
I have to be honest and say I'm not close enough to the beginning farmers to know what mistakes they're making.
Okay.
I was basically a hermit for 20 years, and now I'm not a hermit.
Okay.
I talk a lot, but I don't have much time to go around and really connect with what people are doing on startup farms. But I think that the young farmers I do know are much more sophisticated about figuring out how they're going to make a living than we were when I started. And I think we were a bit indifferent to that. For me in the beginning, I made my living pruning apple trees and picking apples in the fall, and, which I made pretty good money at. But people now, they really make business plans and they think about how we're going to market this and that. I think that's critical. That's important in my experience, although I gave the great example of when I destroyed my first tomato crop by putting on compost that wasn't mature enough. I think that the greater challenge tends to be marketing. Okay, so let me now talk about Eliyahu Goldratt and The Goal. That was a book that really influenced us. Many years ago, I started reading that, and the whole crew was reading it. We were talking about it. And his basic premise is that business schools that say you need constant improvement on every process and, kind of an Edward Deming approach, just continuous improvement of every process, like the Japanese. Goldratt's opinion was what you need is to figure out what the key bottleneck is to success and to resolve that bottleneck and increase the flow through that greatest single limitation. So if you take that perspective, then you look at your farm as a system and you go, well, what is limiting success, or what do I believe will limit my success? And is it my ability to grow carrots, or is it my ability to sell carrots?
Yes.
And at a good price, at a price that is sustainable for the business. And sometimes I've watched our farm, we've oscillated back and forth between, is our ability to grow tomatoes better, or is the limitation our ability to sell the tomatoes at the price that we need in order to make a living?
Yes.
So my advice to a beginning farmer is read the goal.
Yep.
And think about it seriously, because it's written as a novel, so it's pretty painless to read. And actually, I preferred to listen to it on Audible. And they've done a really nice thing with actors playing the roles and everything. It's a fairly simple thing, and if you are interested, Goldratt goes on to apply his theory of constraints to specific things like projects, like construction, to marketing. But I think on a really basic level, we're running relatively simple businesses, and just look and say, well, I've got a market begging for what I'm growing, but I can't supply the market, and I wonder if I could increase my productivity, or they would buy it if it tasted better and the quality was better, but I keep getting, all these gnarly tomatoes or whatever it is. And my guess is that for most people, at least once they get past year 3, that the bottleneck is often going to be the market. That they probably, in my experience, for most vegetable farmers, they probably throw out or leave unharvested 25%, 30%, 35% of what they grew, 40%. From my perspective, I look at that and I go, oh my God, you've just left 40% of your hard work and your invested capital rotting in the field. I think we need to look at that. That's what I would say. And you see it a lot in greenhouse tomatoes, for example. The USDA is giving away hoop houses, right? They're free. And they put up a hoop house, and what's the most profitable crop? Tomatoes. So they plant tomatoes, and then they get 2 or 3 trusses ripening at once, and they rot. And I've been to even some pretty famous, fancy farms. I was just like, wow, you have more tomatoes rotting than I sold in a year.
Yeah.
It's just like, how do you do that? How's that sustainable as a business? So I think that there's a lot of thinking that needs to go on, either to balance what you're going to grow with what you can sell, or to change what you can sell. And of course, the whole dairy farmers right now are just being crushed by their collapsing market. And their market is collapsing basically because of CAFO production is flooding the market with cheap milk. And I just read an article from Lancaster County, which is where I grew up. They were talking about how we're going to deal with a milk crisis.
Yeah.
The milk crisis is we can't make a living on a 100-cow dairy off the price we're getting for our milk. Is that going to change? That is not going to change. The CAFOs are being built at a rapid rate, and they're going to be built in basically, a lot of them are being built in deserts in Colorado and Texas, and they got the cows packed into the sheds. So they're going to flood the market with cheap milk. It is cheaper, so as an economic model, you can produce cheaper milk with a CAFO than you can with a wonderful grass-fed dairy herd. And the conclusion of the article was, if you can't figure out a way to change your marketing and get a premium because this is from Lancaster County, or this is from Vermont, and this was grown on grass, and on, and it's a hard challenge for dairy farmers. Now, for vegetable farmers, it's a little more reachable, because the vegetable farms of the Northeast tend to be dealing directly with their customers. People do know their farmer. And then it's just, how do I persuade people to keep buying vegetables after Labor Day, for example, right? Because it's a terrible problem for people with roadside stands. Or how do I focus all my production when the people are willing to buy it? How do I build the connection with the customer so that they love me and I love them? What's his name? Anyway, he was one of the grandfathers of the CSA movement. And really, I was really inspired by him. So inspired, I even tried a tomato CSA. Didn't work. But he was beautiful. And he said, I sell my crop before I drop my first seed, and I sleep at night. And I don't see how people who are wholesaling sleep at night. And it is scary out there. So I think we're wholesalers. And so, we chose that because I wanted to have time with my kids. But I look back and I go, well, I don't know if that was a good choice or not. It's a choice I made. As they said in The Godfather, this is the life we have chosen. And I'm living with that. But I think for people who have a roadside stand or a CSA or a farmer's market, and that's their market, that's how they sell their crop, that's a wonderful thing. And then how do you build that? How do you strengthen it? How do you give them what they want? And many people are doing that and doing a spectacular job. So maybe for them, production really is their bottleneck, you know? It's like, just how do I produce more efficiently? How do I spend less labor doing this? But I will say one thing, Michael, that was interesting. In the old days, I looked at all my expenses and I was like, well, I can't do anything about the taxes and I can't do anything about the electricity. I can't do anything about this and that and that. What's the one thing I can do something about? Was labor. That's what I thought.
Yeah.
And I looked and I thought we could get more efficient. We could get more efficient. And so, work on reducing labor, not on reducing pay, but on increasing efficiency. And when I read the goal, I looked back and I thought, okay, let's say we got really efficient. We might cut out 10% of labor, right? So 10% of our annual labor costs. And then I compared that to what if we boosted our productivity in the marketplace by 20%?
Yes.
Because we were throwing away 30% just like everybody else. That was an enormous number compared to 10% of our labor.
Yeah, that's an interesting point you're making there.
That's right. Like, focus on where the actual bottleneck is. If your goal is to have a successful farm business, what's the real limitation for reaching that?
Yeah. Let's dive into your marketing there, because you said you're a wholesaler. So talk to us a little bit about that, because you're doing marketing a lot different. You're working with a very few number of clients and you're doing a lot more sales through them.
Well, we actually have a lot of clients, and we deliver directly to a lot of stores in Vermont, New Hampshire, Massachusetts, occasionally Connecticut, and then we also deliver to a couple warehouses.
Okay.
And we do go down to Pennsylvania to Wegmans warehouse. And it's a crazy long way to go, but they're such a wonderful company. Mm-hmm. It's really important to partner with people you can trust.
Yeah.
And I just completely trust them. They're completely who you want to be partners with. So in the end, when you're wholesaling to somebody, it is a partnership. And we try to find customers who will be loyal to us. And in response, we will be loyal to them. And so it's a two-way relationship. Just as I said that farms need to strengthen the relationship to the customer so that it's your family, it's your tribe, it's your people. If you're a wholesaler, you've got to build that relationship also. But it is scarier, because we have had customers who loved us, that we did business with for many years, and then maybe they got a new buyer and the world changes, and all of a sudden, in a fairly short time, you find that there's a problem. So, that's a scary thing. We have been very successful at being adept and at being nimble. And I would say right now we have great relationships with all the stores we sell to. Having said that, I take nothing for granted. Whole Foods is a strong customer for ours. They didn't used to be, but they are now. And we actually deliver directly to all the stores we sell to there. Again, we wanted to be closer to the customer.
Yeah.
So rather than have a buyer and you're just like this item, I wanted to be calling up the person who puts them out on display and sees that the customers love them.
Yes.
Right? Because what we have to sell, what we have to offer, they can't get anywhere else. Their customers really appreciate a tomato that tastes good. And then double bonus points, it wasn't sprayed with pesticides. Now we've got love. And if they happen to notice it was grown in Vermont, that is something else that they love. So the whole package is very attractive. Doesn't mean that the buyer for a chain won't suddenly take you out back and shoot you, though. So we have to always be careful. Whole Foods, really, they've been wonderful partners for us. And I know that there have been problems with some other people, and I don't know what's going to happen because of Amazon. Up until now, we love them and they love us. And they're completely reliable and they pay on time, and wonderful people work in the stores and the customers we're trying to reach, because we know they'll appreciate what we're offering. The only thing that we don't know, and nobody at Whole Foods knows it either, is what's going to happen, because, there's a new sheriff in town, and we'll see. We'll see. I've heard from people in other regions that they've had problems, but I haven't had a problem yet.
Yeah. Very interesting. Very interesting. So let's move on to talking about the organic label, because you've been a certified farm for a long time, and you talked a little bit about the early days were like. Talk to us a little bit about the early days of when they actually started the actual certification program.
Well, the first certification program I was involved in was Vermont Organic Farmers. That was a private label. There was no USDA label. I was one of the original 17 farmers who started VOF. And as far as I can remember, I actually named it.
Okay.
And then it was a small group, right?
Yeah.
And we had meetings, and it was a big debate about whether or not to have it continue as part of NOFA. And we decided to continue rather than have it be an independent group. I'm not sure I even agreed with that, but it was an inspired choice. I'm really glad we did that. NOFA's wonderful group. NOFA Vermont, I support wholeheartedly. Obviously, the point came, and not partly, a lot through the hard work of Vermont Senator Patrick Leahy, the Organic Food Production Act was passed, and the National Organic Program began. And we all had mixed feelings. Many of us were against it.
Uh-huh.
Some were for it. I believe that the intentions were of the best, and a lot of good has come of that. There's no doubt that having USDA involved has greatly helped expand the market of the organic brand. Now, the problem is, as we have become more successful in the marketplace, we, the organic movement, has become a brand that is more successful in the marketplace. The sharks are coming to the blood in the water, and the blood is money. Mm-hmm. And, very, very big corporations now are inorganic, and they're inorganic as a sideline. So you have to understand, when you have a group like the Organic Trade Association, which is the big lobbying group for the organic industry, and their biggest members, for all of their biggest members, organic is a sideline.
Oh, right? Very interesting, yeah.
So they are not going to say ever organic is better than conventional. And unfortunately, a history where they're not going to say we've got to keep the standards really strong.
Yeah.
And on these key things, they have actually been part of the other side. So the industry as a group supported allowing hydroponic, for example. Organic Trade Association supported that. And it's over. We lost that. We've lost everything. We've lost the battle over hydroponic, and those sales are now, by the hydroponic lobby's own claims, have exceeded $1 billion a year.
Oh, wow.
Right? It's big business. And the CAFO production, so the CAFO milk, is probably over $3 billion a year, right? CAFO eggs and poultry is about $2.5 billion a year. So we're over $6 billion a year of sales of stuff that I believe should not be called organic. And when I say it's not some kind of strange personal opinion. The organic movement believes this shouldn't be called organic. So we have this strange thing where real organic producers are getting pushed out of the market very quickly. 10% of the organic dairy farmers in California went out of business this year, and probably be higher by the end, right?
Oh, wow.
That's a big number. And Vermont organic dairy is also, struggling to survive. And the price is so depressed because of these large, Aurora's dairy in Colorado, I think, is 17,000 cows in one facility, right?
Yeah.
No possible way to move 17,000 cows out to pasture and back once a day, never mind 3 times a day. So it's simply impossible, and yet there's been a USDA investigation said, nope, they're pasturing their cows. It's all legitimate. Which the tragedy is that this program, which is so rigorous, is on small scale stuff, and coming and kicking over the garbage cans and saying, let me see your records on that rock powder you used, is allowing this flagrant fraud to happen. And, what do we do about it? Do we talk about it with the public or just amongst ourselves? Because we don't want to destroy the public faith in organic, but is organic going to be organic? So I think that we all face we're at a turning point here.
Yeah.
And of course, that's why the Real Organic Project was formed, and we can talk about that. Yeah. But what do we do? Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a very challenging, because I know you guys. How long did you actually fight? Because we had rallies, and you went to the different hearings and all that. How long did you fight before they actually changed it?
Yeah, I think we were in the fight for about 5 years leading up to it, and there were other people who were in the fight much longer. when I wandered into my first NOSB meeting, and Davey Miskell and I had two petitions that we'd put out because we were starting to see all these hydroponic tomatoes on the market. Like, what is this? I thought back in 2010, they agreed hydroponics should not be called organic. NOSB made a formal recommendation, and this would have been 2013. And there they were. So we went to our first NOSB meeting, which was in Vermont at Stowe, and that's where the first rally was at that meeting. And that was just 50 farmers that, Pete Johnson and a few people called, a few people. This all came up like 2 days before the meeting. Like, well, let's have a rally. And we had, 5 tractors and we went around the block, and Elliot came and people spoke. So when I walked into the National Organic Coalition meeting the day before in Stowe, where they had this meeting of all the organic advocates, and I walked in and there are like 60 people sitting around a giant table, and I was like, who are these people? They all knew each other, and they're all dressed well. They're not farmers. They're not farmers. They're protectors. They're lawyers. They're advocates. They work for NGOs. They work for NOFA. They're people. They all have health insurance. God bless them. But they really have been fighting a long time, and they've been fighting for organic integrity, and they've been losing. So I came in, and I'm like, and we had the rally, and all of a sudden the conversation changed. The national conversation changed because all of a sudden you got farmers protesting the organic standards. And there were only 50 of us, but all of a sudden people are talking to us saying, well, what can we do about this?
Yeah.
The next year we had a much bigger rally in Vermont, and then the next year we had 15 rallies across the country. And we went to a bunch of meetings, and there was a lot of press coverage. I was starting to get used to being on like the front page of the Washington Post or the New York Times, which is an odd feeling, I will say. Yeah. But, there was a lot of coverage. And God, after Jacksonville, I was on Morning Edition, and 10 million people. I thought, this is the 10, 15 seconds you chose out of that 2-hour interview to put on? Because I thought it was pretty weak what they had. But in any case, I now go to parties where nobody knows me, and I mentioned I grow greenhouse and tomato. This happened to me 2 nights ago, and the woman said, they're not hydroponic, are they? I said, no. She said, good, because I don't like that hydroponic business. And I thought, isn't that wonderful? The conversation has gone out so far that she had never heard of me. She'd never heard of the Real Organic Project, but she knew to be careful in the store.
Yes.
However, so we have a situation in which people are only beginning, but starting to understand that they're being misled.
Yeah.
By the people that we all chose to represent and defend and protect us. Yeah. And they're not doing their job. They're defending and protecting big business. And it's not a new story. Unfortunately, it's a very old story. But what do we, farmers, do about this? And that is the question.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so you've started the Real Organic Project. Now tell me, I know there's other people starting similar, like regenerative, organic, and that sort of thing. How do we make sure that we don't confuse the consumer with so many labels?
If the consumer is not confused, they're not paying attention. Consumers should be confused now, right? The idea that the USDA label can be trusted, in my opinion, is a bad idea. I don't trust it. I still buy organic. I still go to the store. I always buy organic. And if I don't know better, I'll buy the certified organic. But I now know that organic chicken from Nebraska is not my idea of organic. Yeah. And those organic tomatoes from Mexico are not my idea of organic. So I think the consumer, I hope that they will get confused and start to question. And honestly, Michael, we all need to become more sophisticated in our understanding of our planet's systems and biology and climate. These are enormous subjects that have tremendous effect on our well-being, and we tend to feel overwhelmed because it's like so big that we glaze over and go watch TV or have a beer, whatever. And I get it. I'm overwhelmed too. But if we want to take care of our kids and our grandkids, then we have to learn more. We have to pay attention. There's some wonderful science out there. This is not an impossible dilemma. Cooling the planet is not out of our reach yet. So I think that we want people to be confused and agitated so that they start to engage in the conversation. And the fact that they don't know which label is not bad. The reason there's so many labels is because there's so many things that people should be thinking about. The idea of labels to guarantee worker welfare is very appropriate. There's still a boycott of Driscoll's berries going on by the workers because they're still getting I think they worked it up to $12 a day in Mexico, and it's not good. It's not good. They're treated badly. There's sexual harassment. There are things that we would take for granted that anywhere in sight for them. And should consumers insist on that? Yes. Back in the day, 100 years ago, the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory had a fire, and that fire killed a lot of people down in New York. And as a result of that fire, the labor movement suddenly was born. It was already struggling, but all of a sudden a lot of people heard about it, and they started to insist that the garment workers got better working conditions. Now we're dealing with a situation where the conditions are just as bad. They're just not in America. Our garments are being made in Bangladesh. They're having the same fires, killing people who are working to make us our nice fleeces and our shirts. And I'm saying that, yes, it is complicated, and yes, it is out of sight, out of mind, but as we can encourage people and invite them to become more knowledgeable, and I think that's what we need to do. So let there be some confusion in the marketplace.
Gotcha. Yeah, gotcha. Yeah, because I chatted with Joel Salatin last week, and his whole feeling is that everything should be customer inspected and that sort of thing. But I think what you're saying is if everyone was just customer inspection, that would be so much more confusion, and it would be very hard to build any sort of understanding.
Well, I think that Joel's idea, as I understand it, is great. And, Joel is in a situation where he's directly selling to everybody all the products on his farm. And Joel, we have to say, is one of the best marketers in agriculture in America. It's like Gabe Brown said to me, I don't believe in labels. I'm like, well, Gabe, if I was you, I wouldn't believe in labels either, right? Because you are the best marketer I ever met, right? Good. I don't say that with contempt. I say that with respect. They're very good at that. However, we have to acknowledge that most food in this country is bought in a supermarket.
Absolutely.
Right? When I was helping to organize the rally last year in Vermont, I went over to Burlington, and it's like this food heaven. You go to the city market co-op, and all the food is local, right? And then there are a lot of people who don't buy their food at the co-op because there are all these great CSAs, and you go there, and it's so dynamic. But you go there in January, most of the food is still bought in the supermarket, whether it's City Market or Price Chopper, and most of that food comes from someplace else, right? And for all of us who live in a food heaven, what about the people who don't? What about our cousins? What about our children? My son lives in New York City. My daughter lives in Hawaii. I went to Whole Foods in Hawaii. The organic tomatoes were Wholesome Harvest hydroponic tomatoes from Mexico.
Oh, wow.
In Hawaii. I was like, oh, my God. And how'd they get them in without having them fumigated? I don't think they did. You're not allowed to bring anything in there without it getting fumigated. So my example is that most people, there's a massive food system, and then you start talking about people of color in communities where they don't have access to any good food.
Yeah.
I love something that somebody said, which is that there is just one food system, and there are many, many branches and tendrils. And we are building something, by all means, is whenever possible, people should know their farmer. That's the best, no question. And it's the best for the farmer, too. But many people are in a situation where they can't, because of location or whatever. I know Gail Fuller in Kansas. Nobody's left in Kansas. He can't sell his crop to the people in Kansas. It's a ghost town, right? Unfortunately, it's been destroyed by agriculture, by CAFO production. So many people need to sell to somebody that they've never met. And I've never met most of our customers, although many of them know who we are and trust us. But it's just how it is. It's a complex system. And so I think we need to address not just the locavore movement, which is critical and important and changing everything, but we also need to consider, what about everybody else?
Yeah, because the system, even though we love to think it's perfect, is not perfect yet. And until that happens, we're going to need this to be going forward.
Yes.
All right, let's kind of wrap it up. That's been a great conversation. It's been very fascinating. I think people can get a ton out of this, just understanding the background, because I think so many people don't understand what actually happened under, the cloak that they kind of threw over this in their closed-door meetings many times, or just very limited access meetings.
Could I say one thing? Just because I didn't say the punchline, which is the Real Organic Project, which is a national group We got farmers from all over the country participating. We got people from all over the country on our boards. We have created an add-on label. We haven't even named it yet, but we've certified 55 farms and, from all over the country. And it's an important thing. It's very simple. It's just the most simple standards, which is just the standards we all already believe in. No CAFOs, no hydroponics. You must be addressing soil health. It's not perfect, but it's a lot better than what's happening. And I want people to know about that. They can go find our website, realorganicproject.org, and sign up, and you'll get newsletters from me. So,
yep.
If you don't want that, don't sign up. But find out about it. It's our effort to offer not just a criticism, but to work on building a solution. And I think, back to the punchline before, after all those years of work, we haven't been able to reform the National Organic Program. We lost on hydroponics. 2 months later, the USDA threw out forever animal welfare regulations that would have basically decertified 85% of the organic eggs and poultry in the country because they're just growing them in CAFOs. And we're not doing so great on fraudulent imports of grain, but that's something that we haven't even gotten to yet. There are bad things happening out there. I'm not saying that they're bad people, but this is not the agriculture that we want to be supporting. Somebody asked me at a rally once, well, what should we do? And I was up on stage and I was like, damn, I don't know what you should do. I really didn't. And so now we got something that people can do. They can support this. Certainly the farmers, I hope it's going to become something. It will take a little while to become a strong label in the marketplace for them, so that the people who really want that food from a real farm, grown by real farmers, real organic, that they can go and find it. So stay tuned for that, but it's important that we have a message of hope in here, and that we not just say, hell, we got beaten again. We don't need to follow the USDA. We started the organic movement without them. We started organic certification without them. That's the best solution, and maybe we'll scare them into that, But if we can't, we don't have to give up the idea of organic agriculture as a movement just because the USDA is not buying into it.
Yeah, we can continue to still have our own standards that we've agreed upon or what's important with the original organic philosophies.
That's right.
So this is an add-on program, so then they'd have to be organic to start with before they could add this on, or how does that work?
Right now, it is an add-on program, and so you need to get USDA certified. Give us a couple $1 million and maybe we would do a standalone, but right now, with our limited funding, the National Organic Program does a lot of good work.
Yeah.
And their inspections, except for some rogue certifiers, are good. There are some that are bad, but they're good. It's a good program. Let's build on that, and it's known in the marketplace. So let's build on that. It's known because of the work we did.
Yes.
Right? It's not because their marketing was so good. It's because people are looking for healthy food and they turn to organic, and word of mouth spread that around. So let's build on what we did and try and still make a distinction for what is it that you're really hunting for, because we actually have that. Bad marketing is where you trick the person, and good marketing is where you're able to connect people with what they really want. So let's have some good marketing. As far as the other label, like regenerative organic, God bless, they're great. They're great. They're a bit aspirational for most farmers at this point.
Yes, I kind of started looking into the rules and how and I was like, wow, this is a lot to implement.
Yes, and we all would aspire to qualify for regenerative organic. But in the meantime, we've got thousands and thousands and thousands of farmers who are real organic farmers, and many of them are certified. Some of them are not certified. That's fine too, and it might not make sense. But I want to rekindle the movement instead of it being something that people are starting to feel kind of bad about. I want it to be something that we reclaim our pride and don't have to keep saying, well, qualifying statements. When I started this, we were all so excited about what we were doing. And I'm still excited. Everyone's still excited. But as a movement, I think it's being buffeted because of the sharks swarming around.
Yes, absolutely. Well, thank you so much, Dave, for your time today. This has been great. There's a lot of great takeaways for farmers. It's great to hear about your operation, the real organic movement, how that's really starting to take off, and just your passion and your heart for really producing better food for our planet.
Thank you, Michael.
So there you have it, another episode in the books. So I'd love if you would hop on over to iTunes and leave us a rating and a review. Those mean everything to us. We love to hear what you're thinking. If you have a podcast guest that you can recommend, please pop on over to the Thriving Farmer Podcast website and leave us a review. That's thrivingfarmerpodcast.com.